The saloon was thick with tobacco smoke and laughter that stung worse than whiskey. Cards slapped against wood, coins clinked like church bells for sinners, and pride hung heavier than the desert heat. That night, Colt McCraw, a ranch hand with sharp eyes and a sharper temper, made the kind of bet men don't expect to lose. He wagered not cattle or coin, but something wilder, his freedom. "Lose this hand," the dealer sneered, "and you marry the one they all whisper about, the Black Beauty." Every man laughed, the sound cruel and cutting. For in their town, Black Beauty wasn't a horse, nor a name spoken with kindness. She was a woman, Selina Ward, skin dark as night, eyes fierce as fire, born of a runaway mother and a father no one claimed. She lived on the edge of town in a cabin near the Cartonwoods, surviving by her own 2 hands while the town spat and mocked. Colt smirked then, certain of his luck. He played bold, reckless, until the final card fell. The laughter turned to jeers, boots stomping on the dusty floorboards. The bet was binding. By sunrise, Colt McCraw would stand beside Selina Ward, the outcast they called Black Beauty, as her husband. His pride burned. Her name burned deeper. What neither of them knew was that a cruel joke was about to turn into a story that no one in town would ever forget. The morning came with the smell of dust and shame. Colt McCraw stood in front of the small clapboard church, hat pulled low, jaw locked like a man marching to the gallows. His friends from the saloon gathered in the back pews, whispering, snickering, waiting to see him break. And then she came. Selina Ward. She wore no veil, no lace, only a plain cotton dress, faded but clean, with the hem carefully mended by her own hands. Her long dark hair was braided neatly down her back, and her gaze was steady, unflinching, like she had seen worse storms than this one. The preacher's voice stumbled on the words, as if even God might frown at this union. When he asked Colt if he would take this woman as his wife, the saloon men snorted. Colt hesitated for a heartbeat, every eye on him, then muttered a stiff, "I do." Selina's turn came. Her voice was clear, strong, though a tremor quivered beneath it. "I do." The rings were iron bands, hastily hammered by the blacksmith. When they left the church, no rice was thrown, no cheers rose up. Only silence, mocking, heavy silence, followed them down the steps. Colt walked beside her, jaw clenched, fists tight. Selina walked taller, almost proud, though her heart hammered. She had not asked for this, but she would not bend her neck to shame. What started as a cruel bet was now bound by law, by vows, and by the eyes of a town that wanted both of them to fail. The cabin at the edge of town had always been Selina's fortress, small, weathered, patched with her own hands. Now it was no longer hers alone. Colt crossed the threshold on that first night like a man walking into enemy territory. He tossed his steel bag in the corner, looked around at the shelves lined with jars of herbs, the fire neatly stacked, the quilt sewn with patient care. "This ain't a home," he muttered. "It's a hideout." Selina didn't flinch. She lit the lamp, its glow painting gold across her dark skin. "It kept me alive," she said simply. They moved through the space like strangers bound by chain. He slept on a cot near the door, refusing the bed. She kept to her chores, grinding corn, tending her small garden, patching her dress. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the sounds of work and wind. But small things began to stir. One evening, Colt came in from chopping wood, his hands blistered raw. She wordlessly took them, rubbed salve into the cracks. He stared at her fingers, gentle, steady, so different from the world's cruelty. Another night, she found his shirt torn at the shoulder. She mended it without asking. He wore it the next morning without a word. They still did not smile. They still did not speak of love. But the walls of the cabin began to shift, not wider, not brighter, but warmer. The kind of warmth that creeps in slow, like embers learning to breathe. The town did not forgive. At the mercantile, women fell silent when Selina entered, eyes dropping to the rope she used as a belt, to the skin they said was too dark for decency. Men spat on the floorboards near her boots. Children giggled behind their mothers' skirts, calling her Black Beauty like it was a curse. And Colt, well, They waited for him to break. Bet you're regretting it now, one ranch hand sneered at the saloon. Better off tying yourself to a horse's tail. Colt said nothing. He drained his whiskey, jaw tight, eyes colder than a river in spring thaw. But when he walked home that night, he saw Selina on the porch, lantern light spilling over her face. She sat sewing by the glow, calm, as though the whole world's scorn hadn't touched her. "You here, Em?" he asked, voice gruff. She didn't look up. "Always do." Something shifted then. The bet that had chained him to her began to feel like something else entirely. Not a punishment, but a test. And though Colt would never admit it, not yet, the test was changing him. It happened on a hot afternoon, when the cicadas screamed louder than church bells. Selina had gone down by the creek to gather water, her skirts tucked at her waist, the sun catching on her braids. That's when two cowhands rode up, drunk, grinning the kind of grin that meant trouble. "Well, if it ain't the dark bride," one slurred. "Heard the cowboy only took you, 'cause he lost his luck." They circled their horses close, cutting off her path. One reached for the bucket, tipping it so the water spilled into the dust. The other leaned down, fingers catching at her sleeve. Selina froze, fire in her eyes but fear in her chest. Then a gunshot split the air. The bucket's iron handle flew from the man's grip, metal ringing against stone. Colt McGraw stepped from the cottonwoods, rifle steady, jaw locked. His eyes burned like coal. "You best ride on," he said, voice low, deadly calm. The cowhands cursed, spat, but they saw the way his finger rested easy on the trigger. They turned their horses and kicked dust in their wake. For a long moment, only the creek bubbled. Selina's breath shook, hands trembling against her skirt. Colt lowered the rifle, stepped closer. "You all right?" She swallowed hard, nodding. "They'll be back." He met her gaze, scarred by silence but steadied by something else. "Then they'll answer to me." For the first time since the wedding, a heart shifted, not in fear, but in the smallest flicker of safety. That night, the cabin felt different. The air still carried smoke from Colt's rifle, and Selina's pulse still quickened at the memory of his voice, calm, certain, like bedrock. She cooked beans over the fire, the smell filling the small room. Colt sat at the table, silent as always, his hat tipped low. The crackle of the fire seemed louder than either of them. Finally, she set a bowl in front of him. "Eat," she said simply. He glanced up, surprised. "Thought you didn't want me at your table." Her eyes held his, steady. "Thought you didn't want to be here." The words lingered, heavy, then softened. For the first time, he gave a small, rough laugh, a sound that startled them both. They ate together in silence, but it was not the same silence as before. It was warmer, filled with the scrape of spoons, the occasional brush of hands when she passed the bread. Later, as she mended her quilt by the fire, a needle trembling in the lamplight, she caught him watching her. Not with scorn, not with pity, but with something she couldn't name. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly, jaw tight. Yet the crack had opened. And through it, something tender began to breathe. Whispers turned to venom. The saloon boys who had once laughed at Colt's loss now spat when he passed. The blacksmith muttered that he'd never shoe Colt's horse again. Women at the mercantile refused to serve Selina unless she left coins on the counter without speaking. It came to a boil one evening. Colt walked into town for supplies, only to find a notice nailed to the post outside the church: no half-breeds. No harlots. No place for shame. The words were meant for Selina. The crowd that gathered smirked as Colt read them. One man, a rancher's son with too much whiskey in his blood, spat near his boots. "Reckon you'd be free if you just left her where she belongs. Ain't too late to send her packin', dot." Colt's hand clenched on the sack of flour he carried. His eyes burned. "She belongs where I say she does." The rancher's son sneered. "Then maybe you both don't belong here." Colt said nothing more. He turned, shoulders stiff, fury simmering under his skin. But when he returned to the cabin and Selina saw the paper in his fist, her eyes filled with something worse than fear, resignation. "They won't ever stop," she whispered. "They'll break you down same as they tried with me." Colt dropped the notice into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, vanished in ash. His voice was rough, but steady. "Let them try." Selina looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, she believed he might mean it. The nights grew colder, wind scraping across the plains like a blade. Inside the cabin, firelight painted the walls gold, shadows stretching long. Selina sat near the hearth, mending the hem of her dress. Colt leaned back in the chair, boots stretched toward the flames, hat tipped low. Silence hummed between them, comfortable now, like a blanket shared. At last, she spoke. "Why'd you do it?" His brow furrowed. "Do what?" "Stand for me. At the creek. Against the town. You could have walked away, Colt. Would have been easier." He stared into the flames, jaw working. "I've been walking away my whole damn life. From war. From men I couldn't save. From a family buried too early. When I saw you there, something in me said no more." Her needle stilled. The fire popped, sparks leaping like stars. Slowly, she set the cloth aside. "They call me Black Beauty like it's filth. But you say my name. You look at me, not through me." Her voice trembled. "That's worth more than any bet." He lifted his head then, eyes catching hers. The scar along his jaw glowed in the firelight, raw and human. "Selina," he said, and her name sounded like a vow. For a long moment, neither moved. Then his hand reached across the table, rough fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. Their hands stayed there, trembling, joined by firelight. No kiss. No rush. Just a touch, hesitant, fragile, but more binding than the preacher's words. It was near harvest when the anger of the town finally boiled over. Selina had gone to trade eggs at the mercantile. She walked home with her basket half empty, the coins clinking faint. She didn't see them waiting, 3 men, the same cowhands who'd mocked her before. They stepped from the alley, blocking the road. Well, one sneered, "Look who thinks she's a wife now." Another snatched the basket, hurling it to the dirt. Eggs splattered, yolk bleeding into dust. Selina's breath caught as rough hands shoved her back against the post of a hitching rail. "You don't belong here," they spat. "Not in this town. Not with him." Selina fought, kicking, clawing, but they were bigger. A rope dangled from one man's saddle, coiled like a snake. They laughed, cruel, lifting it toward her. Then came the sound. Boots pounding. A shout sharp as thunder. Colt McCraw charged down the street, fists clenched, eyes burning. He tore the first man off her, sending him crashing into the dust. The second swung, but Colt caught him with a blow that cracked bone. The third reached for his pistol. Colt's hand was faster. The barrel of his Colt .45 pressed cold against the man's chest before the hammer even cocked. "You touch her again," Colt growled, voice low and shaking with fury, "and you'll see daylight through your ribs." The street had gone silent. Faces peered from windows, children hushed at doorways. Selina stood trembling, the rope still dangling from the man's grip. Colt kicked it into the dirt, then stooped and picked up her broken basket. Gently, so gently, he placed it back in her hands. And in front of the whole town, he laid his scarred hand over hers, steady as stone. The town gathered in silence, crowd thick with judgment. Dust swirled between boots. The 3 cowhands nursed their bruises, too cowed to speak. Selina stood beside Colt, her breath still uneven, her hands trembling around the shattered basket. The rope lay coiled in the dirt, a symbol heavy as any gallows. Someone muttered from the crowd, "Let him waste his life on her." Another hissed, "A bet's a bet. He'll regret it." Selina's shoulders stiffened. For years she had carried their names, their sneers, their shame. Tonight, it threatened to choke her. But then Colt did what no one expected. He bent down, picked up the rope, and held it high for all to see. "This," he said, voice rough but steady, "isn't her shame. It's yours." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He dropped the rope into the horse trough. The water swallowed it, dragging it down, until nothing remained but ripples. Then he turned, facing everyone, and laced his fingers openly through Selina's. "She's my wife. By vow, by fire, by choice. You want me gone, you drive us both out." The crowd wavered. No man stepped forward. No woman spoke. For the first time, the silence did not cut Selina down, it lifted her. A child's voice rang out, clear, piercing. It was the blacksmith's little girl, tugging at her mother's sleeve. Her small eyes fixed on Selina, not with scorn, but with wonder. And in that fragile crack, something shifted. The crowd no longer laughed. They no longer jeered. They only watched as Colt led Selina home, their hands still bound together. The cabin glowed with lamplight when they returned, the night wind rattling the shutters. Selina set the broken basket on the table, fingers lingering on the cracked wood. Colt stood in the doorway, shoulders still taut with fury, chest rising heavy. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it throbbed with all that had just happened, all that had been lost, and all that had been claimed. Finally, Selina whispered, "You didn't have to." Colt's voice was rough. "I did." She turned, eyes shining, not with tears but with something fiercer. "Why?" He stepped closer, the firelight catching the scar on his jaw. "Because I can't stand watching them tear you down. Because every time they spit your name, I feel it burn in me. Because," his hand lifted, hesitant, hovering near her cheek. "Because somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling trapped. And started feeling home." Her breath trembled, her heart slamming against her ribs. Slowly, she laid her hand over his, guiding it to her cheek. His rough palm pressed warm against her skin. They stood like that, no rush, no kiss, only the weight of a truth spoken at last. The fire popped, casting sparks that lit their faces in gold. Selina's voice was barely a whisper. "Then maybe home ain't a place. Maybe it's a person." And in that moment, Colt McCraw, the cowboy who had lost a bet and a freedom, realized he had won something greater. Winter came hard that year. Snow swept down from the mountains, blanketing the plains, sealing roads, testing every soul. Many nights, the cabin shuddered in the wind, but inside, the fire burned steady. Selina and Colt worked side by side, hauling wood, mending fences, tending what little stock they had. They spoke more now, but still in the plain, quiet way of people who had learned that trust doesn't need shouting. One evening, after a long day's labor, Selina found him by the hearth, rubbing the scar on his jaw as though it pained him. She knelt beside him, took his hand, and pressed her lips softly against that old wound. His breath caught, his eyes closing, not from shame, but from release. Another night, she placed the iron ring he had given her, the one forged hastily from a bet, into his palm. Then she opened her other hand, showing a new band she had hammered herself from silver traded in town. "This one I choose," she whispered. He slid it onto her finger, his hand trembling as though it were the first vow he had ever truly spoken. The town never fully welcomed them. Whispers never entirely ceased. But when spring came, folks passing by saw something they could not mock, a garden blooming outside the cabin, rows of beans and corn, Selina's laughter carrying on the wind, and Colt's strong figure chopping wood with a steadiness born of purpose. And at night, through the cottonwoods, a light always burned in their window, a fire neither storm nor scorn could put out. Some say the bet ruined him. Others say it saved her. But those who passed the cabin at dusk, seeing the fire glow and hearing two voices low and steady inside, know the truth lies somewhere softer. For what keeps a heart alive in the desert? A kiss, a scar, or the memory of one hand that never let go?